Good morning to this S&D press conference at a very special and exciting session. I hand over to our group president, Iratxe García Pérez.
Muchas gracias. Good morning. In Spanish. Maybe some of you need translation. Buenos días.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank you for having come along this morning to join us in this press conference. This is, of course, a very important week for Europe, an important week for our political family, and, of course, an important week for the Parliament European itself, the European Parliament itself. As you'll have heard, Ursula von der Leyen was elected by a majority of the House yesterday. Thanks to the votes of pro-European forces in the House. And I think it's fair to say that her election was very much dependent on the position of our group, the S&D group. We have received from Ms von der Leyen a series of written commitments, not just to our group, but to the Parliament as a whole. We had time to assess those commitments. We had time to discuss them in depth, to debate them. And that meant that we as a group were able to take a decision based on the fact that the European project must continue to move forward over the next few years. And it's important to clarify the position of our group in terms of its procedure. Last week, we had the opportunity to listen to the candidates in a political group meeting. And once we'd listened to her, we discussed what she said and realized that she hadn't entered into undertakings firm enough for what we wanted in terms of the future of Europe. And as a result, we decided to proceed with a letter in which we set out our group priorities. This letter was subject to a discussion beforehand with all the various different colleagues from the S&D group. Once that letter had been completed, we had the opportunity to get the answer from the candidate back on Monday. And in yesterday's debate in plenary as well, we were able to further flesh out or obtain further undertakings on the fleshing out of those commitments which Ms von der Leyen made regarding the changes Europe so sorely needs. You will, of course, be fully aware as to what the position of our group was. As we made clear yesterday, the majority of the group supported Ms von der Leyen, despite the fact that there were differing opinions within the group. For various different reasons, certain delegations weren't able to support the group position, but the overwhelming majority of group members were willing to recognize the fact that the candidate had made changes to her agenda, and the undertakings which she'd made were sufficient to sway us. We felt that with an agenda committed to change in Europe, the environment, women's rights, a feminist agenda, if that were to the agenda leading the work of the next European Commission, that would be thanks to the determination of the S&D group throughout this process of negotiation. It's also very important for us to remember that all of us are here in politics to solve people's problems, not create new problems. So I think it's certainly fair to say that the Socialist and Democrat group has shown a great sense of responsibility throughout. We've thought of what's best for Europe and the men and women in Europe who want change. The message from the elections was very clear. And when I spoke during the last plenary, I made clear that we've recognized that people have spoken out. People want change in Europe. People are still believe in the European project. And that further underlines the leadership which our group, our political family, is able to demonstrate. Although we don't hold a majority in the Parliament, we are still able to spearhead the change which Europe needs, building on a position of unity stemming from debate and proposals. So that's our determination, and that will continue. So we will be closely monitoring and following Ms von der Leyen's words and acts so as to ensure that the undertakings she went into, both in writing and in yesterday's debate, are actually carried out. And that's one of the main tasks of our political group, which is determined to exert influence in this House and to bring about change. We intend to work in a spirit of cooperation, but with determination, scrutinising the executive. And we will, I'm sure you'll be interested to follow the way we do this over the next few months. We will be closely monitoring the work of the European Commission. And we want to ensure that the objectives which were spelled out yesterday are fully reflected in policy making over the next few years.
Your name and medium. Merci.
David Carretta, Radio Radicale, Italian Radio. Français, English? Which,
You can speak in Italian if you want.
En français, si c'est possible. Spanish, unfortunately, not. I will try next time. Dans le vote de hier, on a
In yesterday's vote, we saw that Ms von der Leyen made it thanks to two parties, one clearly anti-European nationalist party, the Peace from Poland, and a populist party, the Five Star Movement from Italy. So you referred to a pro-European majority, which you were able to build so as to pave the way to change. However, if we look at the facts, there wasn't a pro-European majority yesterday. There was a majority, but that majority depended on anti-Europeans and populists. So is there a structural problem, including in your own group, which I think is split? How is it possible to make it through this period of Parliament without one of the main groups being able to fully manage all its different members? So first of all, I would say that there are different ways of interpreting what happened. Yesterday in the vote, votes from the extreme right and populists very much spoke out against Ms von der Leyen. The interpretation I draw from it is based on the agenda of the candidate, and her agenda was clearly pro-European. And thanks to that agenda, she was able to get the votes of the socialist group. We were decisive in shaping that agenda. Once again, it's not my job to comment on how other groups voted. Pro-European forces won, and Renew Europe, the EPP, and the S&D group supported Ms von der Leyen. It was primarily thanks to us that she got through. If other political groups voted in favour of Ms von der Leyen on the basis of her agenda, that's up to them. I don't want to comment on that. But when it comes to the agenda for change, which Ms von der Leyen has proclaimed, that is her programme. You've all seen the guidelines she set out in writing, which you'll be able to verify. She talked about the need for environmental change, the fight against the climate emergency, the need for a feminist Europe based on equality with a determined fight against gender violence. She talks about parity in the institutions. Her agenda is clearly progressive. And she underlined the progressive nature of that agenda by committing to strengthening the European social pillar and by promising to promote greater solidarity between member states when it comes to addressing the whole question of migration and asylum policy. Her agenda is also clearly progressive when she promises to step up our fight against climate change. So, as to why other political forces would have given their support to that progressive agenda, it's up to them to explain why. I can explain to you what the position of the S&D group is. We wanted to contribute to fostering stability in the European project for ideological reasons, but also with a view to obtaining commitments which are essential for our political group. It's true that some delegations in the group took different positions, but I can assure you that as from today, our group will be fully united in its efforts to help the Commission achieve those policy-making objectives. So once again, the S&D group will all be working together to ensure that those commitments are translated into facts, because the men and women of Europe are waiting for Europe to move forward. Thank you. I'm from the Cadena Ser TV and radio channel. So coming back to what David said, are you confident that those delegations in your group which didn't vote for Ms von der Leyen will once again support you so as to ensure that the agenda which you've praised can move forward? I'd also like to know whether the position of Frans Timmermans in the Commission was one of the reasons which the Parliament was so dubious about the Council proposal. Do you believe that Mr. Timmermans will still be able to push forward the rule of law agenda and human rights agenda in the Commission? First of all, I have total trust in the unity of our group. That trust has never been undermined. I understand that there are differing opinions on the candidate. That does not mean for a moment, however, that trust in the group has been undermined. What we have to do now is ensure we work together so as to continue to consolidate and flesh out those proposals. I don't know how this will happen. The debates we've had over the last few weeks have, I think, been infused with a sense of trust and belief, and I think that's been reflected in the way in which our group has debated this. We've made it clear that we share the objective she set out, so I don't see any problems there. As far as the veto of Frans Timmermans is concerned, as I said before, this debate was primarily focused on individuals' personalities rather than policy or politics. When it comes to individuals, everybody knows what our position is. We defended our colleague Frans Timmermans as our Spitzenkandidat, somebody who could have had a majority in the European Parliament, and we defended him right through till the end, right through to when the Council, after days of protracted negotiations, was unable to get the support for our candidate from our political family. Once that became clear, we had to accept our responsibility as a political family which wishes to help govern Europe. And in the light of that, we had to take stock of the situation quickly. We had to weigh up the different alternatives. And obviously, in doing this, we were in constant contact with Mr. Timmermans. And as you will have seen yesterday, he was there to welcome Ms. von der Leyen and her address. Because the positions she set out match closely all those policy positions which we defended during the electoral campaign. You all know that the commitments she's entered into to ensure that Mr. Timmermans be the first Vice President of the Commission. Negotiations will now start to fill the different posts in the Commission. And we've made it very clear to Mrs. von der Leyen, and she's echoed this, that Mr. Timmermans should be given a strong political post. We're not in a position yet to make predictions as to what his portfolio will be, but I can promise you that he will play a key role in this process of change.
Hola, buenos días, Jorge.
Good morning from Euroactive. Yesterday, we heard that there would be 8 delegations voting against Mrs. von der Leyen, roughly 44 votes in all. So there would have been 109 in favour. So it would appear, though, given the way the vote played out, that there may have been more votes cast against her in the secret ballot from your group's ranks. So how do you think you lost additional votes? And what type of faith would you have in those delegations that stated they would vote in favour but ended up voting against? What interpretation would you make of that decision to vote against? It is not down to me to read people's minds. I don't know how the individual members voted, and I think all you can have is an interpretation. It's not down to me to try to second-guess people's votes. I am aware of the discussions within my political group. I know that there were some delegations that had a specific position. But that's not what we're here to do now. We're here to work, to get cracking. Mrs. von der Leyen has had her candidacy confirmed, and now we want to see that any commitments undertaken are delivered on. I'm not going to chase after individual votes, how many might have been missing from the S&D or how many she might have lost in the EPP. It's not down to me to try to make such estimates or guesses. What I feel is important is that the S&D is united in pursuing an agenda for change.
Thank you.
Espera, preguntaba por Stanijev. A ver, insisto.
It's not down to me to try to interpret how different delegations voted. I think if you've got specific questions, you need to put them to the individuals in question. I'm not going to speak on behalf of heads of national delegations who adopted different positions or people from other political parties. I'm here as leader of the S&D group. If you have a specific question for a specific delegation, then it would be best to put that question to that person so that they can set out their delegation's views.
Thank you. Thomas Kutschka, FAZ, Germany. Good morning. Yesterday, when the plenary debate started, you had all these written assurances. You had the letter from Ursula von der Leyen. And still, my impression was in the beginning, applause from overall the House, but also from your group, was only lukewarm. And then it grew more substantial until in the end, maybe there was some kind of warmth or openness toward her that wasn't there in the beginning. So how did you experience the dynamics of the debate yesterday, and how important was that in order to bring her across the line?
Mrs. von der Leyen addressed the European Parliament plenary talking about humanitarian corridors to save lives. I think that very fact is important not just for my political family, but for all who believe in the European project. She talked about domestic violence, gender-based violence being codified as a crime. I think that is important for Europe. The fact that she made clear commitments when it came to the fight against climate change, ensuring climate neutrality, that is good news for Europe. We all believe that there will be no second opportunity for this planet. So the speech wasn't just about pitching to the S&D political family. It was a pitch to a pro-European progressive majority. Other people may have voted for her. It's down to them to explain their votes. But the speech we heard yesterday in the European Parliament plenary was one that lived up to the circumstances, our expectations, the challenges that the European Union is currently grappling with. It was a marked difference to the type of discourse we hear from those seeking to undermine and destroy the European project. So we were very satisfied with what we heard. I am pleased to note that my political group played a real role in shaping that speech too.
Yes, my name is Inka Rabis-Moses. I'm coming from Croatia, working for a political magazine. Well, as much as I remember, when this kind of compromise was reached between Merkel and Macron about Timmermans, the group of countries in the Council who were against Timmermans were Visegrad Group countries, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, and our Prime Minister, who was chief negotiator for EPP, coming from Croatia, grouped with those countries. How do you explain that, and what do you expect from those countries now, and in which way should new President of Commission treat them? Because as we know, Mr. Timmermans insisted on the rule of law and a way of punishing those who do not respect that.
Y la señora von der Leyen.
Mrs. von der Leyen will have to make the same demands hold strong in the same way. Championing rule of law is a fundamental issue as far as we are concerned. That is the point we made in our letter, and that was very much the tenor of her speech yesterday. So we will be vigilant. We need to make sure that she honours her commitments. We cannot have countries in the European Union who do not sign up to values such as solidarity, justice, tolerance, respect for fundamental human rights.
Siding with those countries?
Insisto.
I would repeat what I have said before. We have adopted commitments. I think that now we need to focus our attention on the commission that will be put together over the coming months, the work programme it will adopt, and then we need to get cracking and start work.
Catherine, and then we have to close. Merci.
Catherine Fior, EU reporter. I've read that the German SPD MEPs didn't vote for Mrs von der Leyen, and that may well have been for national political reasons rather than the European agenda. I appreciate that you can't read minds, as you've just said, but can you put yourself into other people's shoes? Do you think you would have voted differently if Spain was governed, was led by the Party Popular?
I have a great deal of empathy. I can put myself in other people's shoes, and I do understand the different positions adopted. At all times, we need to face facts, recognise the circumstances we're in. Europe is at a turning point. We have a clear choice between strengthening the European project and changing it, or siding with those that wish to destroy it, undermine it. At such a crucial turning point, I believe that our political group shouldered its responsibilities, and that is what I did as a socialist from Spain. My position from the outset has not been linked to any national government or the Council. My position was one shared by the members of the S&D. We had frank, open discussions, and then we recognised the need for responsibility, and that is how we behaved. That is how we conducted ourselves as a political group and a political family.
Have a good week. Merci. Gracias.